Mindy, and thank you. Thank you all for being here. As Mindy mentioned, I'm one of the professors of practice at Fels, and I have the pleasure of getting to teach economics and data analysis courses as part of our curriculum. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to tell you about our program today. As I always tell my students, please do interrupt and ask questions as I'm going along. So I will do my best to keep the chat open if you want to put anything there, but you're also encouraged to unmute your microphone and ask your question live if you feel comfortable doing that. I have about 30 minutes maybe of kind of planned material, but then there will also be plenty of time at the end for open Q&A if you, for some reason, want to ask your question at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Can everyone see this well? The audio's good? Great. So let me just start by saying that the Fels Institute of Government has been around for quite a while. We got our start because of the gentleman standing in front of the microphone in this picture. His name is Samuel Fels. He was a soap maker in the 1930s. This was a time when there was a lot of corruption, especially in local government and particularly in Philadelphia. And so he became passionate about training the next generation of ethical and effective public servants. He's actually the gentleman who donated the Fels Mansion, which is the building you see on this first slide here, where we have many of our classrooms and offices. It's really a beautiful spot on campus. So we're thankful for him for donating that and for really getting us the start in that mission, which is how we have continued throughout all of these decades. That still is our core mission, is training the next generation of effective and ethical public servants. Let me talk a little bit about what makes Fels unique. This may be particularly of interest if you're looking at a lot of different MPA programs or MPP programs and you want to know a little bit about the nuances of how they may differ. I would say the Fels Advantage is really three things. One is we are very focused on offering a practical education, but also one that gives you the rigorous analytical tools you need in a very personal context. So I'm going to unpack those three things in a little bit more detail now. So starting with the practical side, an MPA degree is a professional's master's degree. And so we think it's important that you not only take your studies as an opportunity to develop your knowledge and your skills, but that you have experience putting those into practice. And so integrated throughout the curriculum are opportunities for you to do just that. One of the first ways that your studies are very practical would be in the use of various course projects. So you'll see this in basically every class you take at Fels, but just to give one example, when I teach data analysis and program evaluation in the spring, every year I take on a real world client. And then for the last month or so of the course, we work as a class to deliver something for that client using all of the skills we've learned that semester, data analysis, data visualization, how do you write up quantitative results in a way that your audience can understand. The first time I taught that course, we worked with the City of Dallas Office of Innovation to evaluate some food access pilots that they wanted to put in place in various food deserts in the city of Dallas. This year, we're going to be working with a nonprofit organization based out of Washington, D.C. called the Education Trust. They would like us to do some data analysis surrounding the difference between universities' forecasted cost of living for undergraduates and what the actual cost is, because this has pretty important implications for students being able to afford college and their financial aid awards. Now, I will say, when you have course projects from an instructional standpoint, it actually makes things a little more difficult because there are all these different variables. Like when we were working with the City of Dallas, that was right when the pandemic was beginning. So the project had to evolve and change, and there are these different moving parts. I actually think, though, that it's very much worth the investment that we kind of as the instructional team have to put in to set these opportunities up, just because encountering those obstacles, pivoting, that's an important part of your education and something that you won't get if we just stick with, previously written examples or applications. All of our students in the full-time MPA program complete an internship during the summer, the final summer you're here because it's a one-year program. And the nice thing about Fels is that we actually guarantee $5,000 of funding for every student to do an unpaid internship. So in the past, what we saw is students may have found an internship that was in perfect alignment with their goals and interests, but then the fact that it was unpaid, that may have been a financial barrier for them. And so the fact that we guarantee that $5,000 of funding, that stipend during the summer, makes it possible for our students to undertake whatever internship really is going to give them the best exposure, networking opportunities, experiences, and so forth. Finally, all of our MPA students across our 2 different degree programs, the 1-year full-time program and the 2-year part-time program, are required to complete a capstone project. This is your culminating experience during your time at Fels, where you take all of what you've learned throughout all your classes and apply that to a real world problem or challenge. This will either be for a government office or a nonprofit organization. And you have 2 different options for fulfilling that requirement. You can either propose your own project, or you can select from a list of pre-vetted projects. So I'm actually one of the people who's in charge of managing this whole capstone process. I have a list at this point of more than 200 contacts at various nonprofit and government organizations. So every cycle I'll reach out to them and get submissions for projects for our students. I will also add new people to the list every semester based on the interests of the students. So for example, this year we had one student who was interested in doing a project for NASA. Now that's not a place where I had a contact already or was already on our outreach list, but we were able to get in touch with someone in the Legislative Affairs Office, and now he's working with her to figure out what would be a mutually beneficial project. So that does sometimes happen where you might have a very niche interest. I, of course, can't make any guarantees, but I will try my absolute best to make sure that we can try to target some of your most preferred organizations for the capstone. To give you a sense of what a capstone might be, you can actually look on our website. We have an archive of some of the past projects. I will say not all of them are posted just because occasionally there are confidentiality issues that prevent us from putting that online, but you can see a nice cross section of projects. One of our EMPA students from this past year wrote up a strategic plan, and then he actually became the executive director of that nonprofit organization. We've had students do program evaluation or data analysis projects for various, programs and policies. We have a student this year doing a project for the Department of Housing and Urban Development on the federal level. We have some students on the state level. We have quite a few students on the local level, since that's one of our areas of expertise, and many students come to Fels wanting to do that. So we have a lot of partnerships, for example, with offices in the city of Philadelphia or the Philadelphia Police Department. Of course, you're not limited to Philly, but we do have that, I think, as kind of a differentiating factor if that's a particular interest of yours. I will also say, as part of the capstone, you're not all on your own. You actually have a capstone advisor who is like your coach throughout the whole experience. And our past students have just had glowing reviews of the capstone advisors and how they've really helped them. You also take a capstone course, as I'll talk about, as part of the curriculum, so that you have a framework for proceeding through your project and making sure you're on track with these various checkpoints, so that come the time when you give your final presentation and give the final deliverable to that organization, you have a very high quality product. So that's some of the ways that we incorporate practical elements into the programs. Let me now talk a little bit about the analytical side. So obviously it's very important that you have practical skills, but you're probably coming to the MPA because you want to upgrade maybe your technical abilities or gain some new knowledge that's going to be helpful for you in propelling you forward in your career. We have organized the curriculum around 3 core areas that we believe are invaluable for public leaders in the 21st century. Those are statistics and data science, economics and finance, and leadership and policy. So in statistics and data science, I would say we have a particular focus on helping people who are maybe a little bit math phobic or a little bit scared about working with data. And we make sure that you are able to approach that subject in a way that's really going to be understandable to you. We teach through, real data sets and real applications, real clients, as I mentioned before. And a lot of students, I think, are surprised by the end of their studies how excited they are about their new skills that they have to make evidence-based decisions in their future positions. You also will learn about economics and finance, both from kind of a macro perspective, a more micro perspective, and then a public finance course that focuses more on budgeting and also practical skills that you would need to know. And then finally, leadership and policy. So we know that you not only need to have the knowledge and more the hard skills, but you also need to be able to mobilize people to get things done. And you need to understand all of the important context, the political context, the economic context, the historic context when you're developing programs and policies. And so that third area is designed to make sure that you're prepared in that way. Finally, and this is probably the one I would say out of the three that really is Fels specific, is how personal the education is. We are quite a small program compared to other MPA or MPP degrees that you could do. In any given cohort, there are between usually 30 and 35 students. What that means is you're never taking large lecture-based classes, and you have a lot of face-to-face interaction that's very personalized with your professors and with the staff and career advising and all of that. I can say confidently that I know the name of every single person in the program. One, because I have the privilege of teaching economics to every student, but also because, I see people all the time. They're hanging out in the lounge. I walk by them when they're having their study group. I hear about, what they're doing in their other classes that they're really excited about. And I personally love that aspect of it. I think the students also derive a lot from the fact that it's very personal, that a lot of them will say, this is a Fels family. They become, best friends with a lot of their classmates. You also get very individualized career services and mentoring. It's not like there's this one big career office that's very generic. Instead, we have Colleen Bonner, who's absolutely fantastic, who is meeting with you from day one to identify your strengths, weaknesses, goals, where you want to go, and connecting you with alumni and opportunities that will be helpful for you in facilitating that. The degree is very customizable. We have a number of dual degree options I'll talk about. You also get to choose elective courses to develop your expertise in a certain area of interest. And the nice thing about being at Penn is that you have the small feel of Fels, but then you also have all of the resources of a large Ivy League institution. So many of our students will go to other graduate departments or schools to take their electives. They might go to Wharton, the business school. They might go to SB2, the School of Social Policy and Practice, or the Graduate School of Education. There are just a number of opportunities that are open to you to customize in that way. Finally, I will note, and I think I mentioned this earlier, that we are rooted in Philadelphia. I think that does have a few advantages. One is that Philadelphia in many ways is typical of large urban cities around the world in that we're grappling with a lot of the same policy issues, whether that's the opioid crisis or poverty, homelessness, the pandemic, whatever it may be. If there's an issue out there, probably someone in Philadelphia is trying to address that. And so that provides opportunities for us, for example, to take class trips. One of our other professors, Mike DeBerardinis, as one of his class sessions, will take the students to the neighborhood of Kensington, and they'll hear from community leaders, stakeholders, experts that are there about the opioid crisis. So you get a firsthand glimpse, and that's a great experiential learning opportunity that we have access to because we are in Philadelphia. As I mentioned, if you have a particular interest in Philly, we do have a lot of connections throughout the city. But if Philadelphia isn't your cup of tea, we of course have graduates who go all over the country once they're done. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of how you can actually earn a Fels degree. We have a few options. We have our full-time MPA program, our executive MPA program, which is the part-time option, and then a non-degree opportunity. The full-time program is a 12-month program. It's 9 courses. I will tell you from looking at other MP and MPP programs, I think this is actually the fewest number of courses to get a degree. And the reason for this is we have really tried to focus on the absolute fundamental things you need to know without, extra fluff courses, so to speak, so that one, you can kind of get back to doing your important work for the public sector as soon as possible, but also to keep the cost of the degree as affordable as possible. So because at universities in the US, you're typically charged per credit or per course, the fact that you're able to take these 9 courses and learn what you need to know is a very cost-effective alternative if you're looking at maybe another 2 or 3 year program or even a 1-year program that has a lot more than 9 courses. Most students in this program have about 2 to 5 years of work experience, but that does vary. We certainly have people coming straight out of their undergraduate studies and people who have been working for decades. This is an on-campus program. So here's how the curriculum is laid out if you're interested in the full-time program. So in the fall, you would take statistics, public economics, public law, and public process, and then you would choose one elective course. So you take 4 courses total in the fall. At the same time, you would be doing some exploration and matching to try to identify your capstone. Then in the spring, you take follow-on courses in those 3 core curricular areas. So you would do program evaluation, public finance, and public management. You would also choose a second elective, and then you would be enrolled in the non-credit portion of the capstone course where we help you with planning, research, and design. The beauty of this is you actually pay no tuition for this class, but you get all of the support from your capstone advisor and the instructor. So it really is a nice feature, I think. And then in the summer, you complete your internship and you enroll in the 4-credit part of the capstone course where you're doing your analysis and writing and wrapping up the project. The Executive MPA is our part-time option designed for working professionals. It's a 21-month program. Most people in this program have about 5 to 10 years of work experience. They tend to be a little further along in their careers, but again, there is significant variation. This is a flexible learning setup where you do some on-campus learning and some virtual learning. So how it works is at any one time, you take 2 classes. You have a class on Zoom once a week for an hour. And then once per month, you come to campus for what we call our on-sites or our intensives, where you would have class all day Friday and all day Saturday. So one class would be 9:30 to 5:30 on Friday. Your other would be 9:30 to 5:30 on Saturday. We also schedule those intensive days around some of our other events. So you can look on our website, and I'll show you this in a little bit. But with things like the Public Policy and Practice speaker series, we will often have that on the Thursday before the Friday on-site starts, so that if you're traveling to campus, you can take advantage of all those things while you're here. The curriculum is pretty similar for the Executive MPA. It's just kind of how it's laid out over 21 months rather than just 12 months. So your first fall, you take quantitative methods and public management. Then you would take economics and program evaluation in the spring. In the summer, you would take financial management of government and nonprofit organizations and public law. You would begin that capstone process of, identifying what your project is going to be. In the fall, you would choose 2 elective courses. You would enroll in the non-credit part of the capstone. Again, the beginning stages where you're doing the research, designing your project, and getting started. And then your final semester is in the spring of your second year, where you take a 3rd elective and finish up your capstone. We do have a non-degree option where you can enroll in Fels elective classes without committing to a specific degree program. And then later, if you apply to those programs and want to start a full-time or executive MPA, up to 2 of those courses can transfer towards that program. Here are some sample electives for those of you who may be interested. These are only the ones that are Fels specific electives. So there's a much, much longer list of hundreds of other courses you could take in the other schools and departments. But just to give a sense of some of the courses we offer through Fels, negotiations and public communications are oftentimes very popular courses. We just started this new course this year using big data for policy challenges. Students have really loved that class. We have classes on, seminars on more specific topics. Another class that always fills up is data science for public policy. We have a number of dual degree articulation agreements. So if you want to come to Penn and do more than one master's degree, you can combine it with other degrees. So we have some students who are joint MPA JD candidates. Some students could do a master's in law, public health, education policy. We have a very long list here. If you are interested in one of these dual degrees, I would encourage you to reach out to Mindy by phone or by email. And that way she can talk you through the specifics of, that particular program, how the courses would work, how your schedule would work, and all of that. Here's a little more information about our Fels cohort. So the typical cohort size, as I mentioned, is around 32. The average age for the full-time program is 27 versus 35 for the MPA. But if you're not around those ages, don't be worried. Every year we have quite a wide range. 27% of the students that we have enrolled identify as first-generation college students, 20% low income, 27% from underrepresented minority backgrounds, and about 12% international students. And those students are in the full-time program because of the visa availability. Let me talk a little bit more about the customized career services, since that's probably something that's top of mind, given that you're considering a professional master's degree. Fels has a number of ways that we build your network. I've already talked about the internships and capstones. We do have students who will maybe do an internship for an organization or complete a capstone and then catapult that into a job after they graduate. So that's certainly a path that some of our students have taken. We have a formal mentorship program where you will be assigned someone who's senior in the field you're interested in, or someone who would be a good match for you to help mentor you and provide advice and guidance. Our students really appreciate that one-on-one mentoring that they receive through that program. We have our public policy and practice speaker series, where we will have these talks where major government leaders or leaders in the public sector will be interviewed, and they'll tell you a little bit about their work, but oftentimes the focus is also about their career trajectory. How have they gotten to where they are today? So if you're aspiring to some of those same outcomes, you can learn from their experiences. We often have other happy hours, networking events in connection with those public policy and practice speaker series. So for example, next Thursday, we have one of our public policy and practice events. The talk is going to be from 6 to 7, but then we have an appetizer network hour at the Fels Mansion from 5 to 6. So that's a great opportunity to connect with your classmates, with alumni, and really build up your network. I'll actually take a moment to stop sharing the screen, and I'll show you where on the website you can see all of the public policy and practice speaker series and all the other events we have. So if you go to, let me pull it up here 1 second. If you go to our website and you look at the top, there are these home, academics, tuition and aid. If you click on events, this page will come up. And it lists all of the different events. So the public policy and practice, the racial equity conversation series, any other panel discussions we might be having. And you can certainly talk to Mindy if you're interested in attending those and just seeing what they're like. That's certainly an option for you. So let me go back now to the presentation. So we have a number of events, as I mentioned, the public policy and practice, and this could be anyone. We've had, governors, congressmen and women. Recently, we had scientists who worked on the mRNA technology for the COVID vaccines. We've had leaders in the nonprofit space. So it really is a wide cross-section of different leaders in the public sphere. Beyond those two, we also offer career talks and advising. So we might invite 4 people to give a panel talk or discussion at the Fels Mansion about a particular career area. You might find someone working on something that you didn't even know was a career option, but then because you attended the career talk, you learned about that and then figured out that that maybe is what you want to do after graduation. We, of course, have a very active Fels alumni network. As I mentioned before, we're kind of colloquially known as the Fels family. So our alumni are always very enthusiastic about connecting with the current students. And you have the larger alumni network at Penn, which is also there for you, called QuakerNet. Let me now discuss a little bit about scholarships and financial aid. So I'm really proud of the faculty directors at Fels for doing as much as they have to fight for as much funding for our students as possible. So one thing to note is that we don't actually set our tuition rates. That's set by the larger university. We basically have no control over it. So what we try to do is get as much scholarship money as we can to make the degree affordable for our students. So the public leadership and service fellowships, that's the $5,000 of internship funding that I mentioned previously. We also offer something called a 15 for 5 scholarship. This is a $15,000 scholarship for applicants who have 5 years of public sector service. We have a number of scholarships with admissions partners, and I've put them on the slide here. If you have previously worked for AmeriCorps, the Bonner Foundation, Lead for America, Teach for America, any of the ones listed here, you will automatically qualify for at least an $8,000 scholarship. Now, I will say many of our students in practice get much more than an $8,000 scholarship, so it might be $10,000 or $12,000. That's just the minimum. Then we have our Fels Public Service Scholarship. This is what we call essentially our general aid, general merit aid. So if you don't qualify for one of these other ones, or even if you do, you could get additional scholarships on top of that. I will say, based on the most recent data I remember seeing, 80% of our EMPA students receive some type of scholarship aid, and it was typically around $8,000 on average. If you look at the full-time group, it's around 87% of students are getting some type of aid, and the awards vary between about $1,000 and $15,000, but the average is probably around $7,000 to $8,000 of kind of other aid, plus the $5,000 of the PLAS, the internship stipend that you can use. One other thing that I think I already mentioned is how we've tried to streamline the curriculum so that, the tuition cost is not out of control. The other nice thing is you don't have to separately apply for any of these scholarships or financial aid. When you submit your application, we automatically review all the students and we'll award this just based on the information we have already in your application. So applying to Fels, the deadline for our full-time programs are coming up soon. We have a priority deadline of December 1st. If you apply by this date, we will waive the application fee. So it'll be free for you to apply. If you can't quite get your application ready by then, you can certainly apply by our regular deadline of January 15th. The executive MPA admissions happen in 3 rounds. So the priority deadline is December 15th. Then we usually have a second round where you would submit your application by February 15th. If we still have room in the class, room in the cohort, we would have a third round where you can submit your application by April 15th. Because of the structure of these 3 rounds, it does behoove you to apply sooner rather than later. And then non-degree admission is on a rolling basis. The application is pretty standard, pretty straightforward. You're going to fill that out online, upload your resume, include a personal statement, which essentially is asking you why you want to pursue an MPA. One thing I will say as someone who reads a lot of these applications is that if there's a particular reason you're interested in Fels, maybe some of those things I mentioned at the beginning, the small cohort or connection to Philadelphia or practically focused education, if any of those things ring true to you, please do mention it in the essay, because we are trying to find applicants who are going to take advantage of what we believe our strengths are at Fels. You'll include some transcripts and letters of recommendation. Test scores are encouraged, but not strictly required. So we know during the pandemic, a lot of students were not able to take, for example, the GRE. So we're not requiring it, but if you do have those scores, we encourage you to submit them because they do give us a more complete picture of your academic abilities and academic record. We don't have any strict cutoffs on GPA or test scores. We evaluate applications holistically, but we do want to make sure that every student we admit is going to be set up for success. That's all of the prepared content I have for today. Now I'll open it up for Q&A. And I have the chat here. So if for some reason you feel more comfortable asking your question that way, you can do that. If you want to unmute your microphone and appear on camera, that's always great. So that's another option too.
I'll also just throw out there that we're really lucky this afternoon to have Kelsey Gustafson with us, who is a recent Fels MPA graduate from the Executive MPA program. So she is, I think, happy to answer any questions that might come up. She can fact check us and say if there's anything we're saying that isn't really true, and just give you a better sense. So thank you, Kelsey, for joining us.
So I think I see one question here in the chat. This was an anonymous question. What's the return on investment with the EMPA program? What is the average post-salary graduation? On average, how long does it take graduates to pay back the loans? So I'm actually, in my other life, other than teaching classes, a higher education economist. So I've looked at the data that is available. Unfortunately, right now, we're in the process of collecting very systematic salary data. It's something that's been difficult to do, but we're in the process. So I don't have the exact salary data. What I can tell you is that the Department of Education does put out data on the debts of graduates. They don't break it out between the EMPA and MPA program, but I did, just out of curiosity, go ahead and look at what the average debt levels were and kind of how we stacked up to other programs. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact number, but I can tell you that I was pleasantly, maybe not surprised, but we had one of the lowest out of most programs. And that information that was published online was actually based on our programs from several years ago when it was a 2-year full-time program or a longer EMPA program. So it was actually much more expensive. So if anything, the debt levels have gone down. So I'd have to go back and look to give you an exact number. If you email me afterwards, I can try to find that data again if you're curious. But I will say, I do know that the vast majority, more than 95% of people are employed very soon after graduation and in fields, jobs they're satisfied with, from talking to some of my former students. But yeah, if you're more curious about the data, I can go and pull at least what we have.
Also, just add a little bit of color to that. So everything Lauren said is absolutely right. And we are in the process of collecting more granular data. One thing, though, that's worth mentioning is there can be a very wide spectrum of salaries, looking at folks who are working in the nonprofit space, in local government, federal government, and then also looking at private sector. And so there can be a very wide range. We understand that most folks are not getting into government work purely for the money. Otherwise, most people are picking different career paths. So there's a lot of nuance there, but we do a lot of work to try to make it as doable as possible and make sure you're really getting good, bang for your buck. That we understand it as a professional investment in your career, and we want to make sure you're getting a really good payoff there. And then just to echo what Lauren said, class of 2020, within 6 months of graduation, 100% were working in jobs that they desired, or continuing education, or in political campaigns. And in the class of 2019, I was 97%. We'll follow up with the class of 2021 shortly, but anecdotally, it's folks are getting jobs, so it's good stuff. It's a great question.
Okay, I see another question in the chat here. As an international student, can I do an early application with my original TOEFL score and then send scores later of the new test? Mindy, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So, oh, sorry, another question just came in at the same time. Yeah, so you can definitely submit your application early, with the information that you have. If you take additional tests later, feel free to send an email and we should be able to update it. One thing though is once your application is complete, we will, it'll get reviewed. It won't be reviewed until all the components are in. So I would, if you're planning to take the TOEFL again, pretty quickly, that could be a viable option. If you're thinking of taking it, in several months, it might be a bit late by then, but I'd invite you to follow up afterward. I'm happy to talk about specific circumstances. And we always say that with everyone too. We encourage everyone to, reach out with individual questions. It is a small program. We get to know folks, really well. So always welcome everyone to follow up with any specific concerns.
We have a few more questions here. The first one I see, are EMPA students limited in what electives they can take compared to the full-time students? I assume those classes would have to be offered online or during the monthly in-person sessions.
So that's a great question. So you're not limited in what electives you can take. You can actually take electives at any of the 12 graduate schools at Penn, as long as there's availability and it's aligned with your professional interests. You're not limited by us in any way. If you live outside of the Philadelphia area, then you realistically are more limited to classes that are offered in a hybrid or online format. There are some classes, a lot of classes that are offered, in a once a week, 3 hours in the evening format to focus on folks who are working professionals. We have had some folks, come in from DC or New York or Harrisburg each week to take advantage of those opportunities. Interesting, takeaway from COVID, 2 years ago, I would have said there are not a ton of programs that are doing classes online or in more remote friendly formats, but we actually have seen a lot of programs add classes and continue to keep classes in those more flexible formats. So you definitely would have access to all of the Fels classes in the hybrid format, and welcome folks to come around executive weekend. So you sort of have an extra advantage if you're local to the area. Fels, we always try to schedule our elective classes in the evening whenever possible, to take advantage of practitioner instructors who are maybe working during the daytime in their fields, and can't teach during the day, but B, so that our executive and professional students are able to join in on those as well.
Okay, next question. I have never used data to make a policy recommendation, nor have I used data to make a recommendation in my work. Am I a good fit for this program if I want to make a career change? How would I write the second essay question? So this is great. I have there's two parts of this question, so I have two responses. One I'll address first, which is the career change question. So absolutely, we have a number of students every year who are coming maybe from the for-profit world and they want to move into public service. And so they're using the MPA degree to do that. You are absolutely encouraged, to take advantage of our degree program for that purpose. If that is your goal, please do mention that somewhere in the application, say maybe in your essay, just because occasionally we'll have students who are just applying kind of randomly to all these programs and their entire resume is, jobs at firms in the for-profit industry. They'll write their essay about why they want to work at a company, and then it's kind of unclear why they're even interested in the MPA. So just to make sure that we understand your goals and your mission, make sure that that's clear, but that's definitely not a detractor when we're reading the application. We would love to see more people go into the public sector. The second part of that question, I guess, is more about the essay prompt. So the second one asks you to talk about using data to make a recommendation. You can interpret this question very broadly, very liberally. It doesn't have to literally be, oh, I collected this hard data and, made a recommendation to my supervisor or generated a policy or anything like that. It's really just, when have you made an analytical choice? Or when have you made a recommendation? So we've sometimes had people in the essay say, I was working at my company and I noticed that there was this problem with the way the service was being delivered. Anecdotally, people were complaining about this. I saw this as the common theme, the common thread. Here's what I did about it. It's not like they had hard data, but they were still making a recommendation based on some evidence that they had seen. Mindy, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, yeah, that totally makes sense, but definitely invite folks who are thinking about a career change to do that. Kelsey, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know one of the things that is really, folks tend to enjoy a lot about the executive program is the diversity of backgrounds that folks are bringing, folks who have government, nonprofit backgrounds, folks working in the private sector. Kelsey, if you'd like to share any insights on, the cohort and folks who have different, backgrounds, feel free to do so. And if not, it's
yeah, absolutely. So just to give a little background, I actually came into Fels as a museum educator. So I had absolutely no experience in data whatsoever, and did not see myself as a data person. And I remember on our first day of quantitative analysis, our instructor, Claire Robinson Kraft, asked us how scared we were on a scale. And I was like top of the scale, like terrified, petrified of using data. And I think I did horrible in statistics in my undergrad. So I was very nervous. And interestingly enough, I ended up becoming an Impact Ed Fellow. So there's also the Impact Ed Fellowship that you can apply for, and ended up becoming really interested in data. And now I'm actually looking into evaluation and data analysis jobs. And I find it really interesting, especially being someone who I came from an archaeology background, and I'm really interested in using information to piece together stories or an understanding of a larger picture. And I feel like data kind of fits perfectly with that. So if that's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend looking more into this program. And it's definitely something that you don't have to have a background in. Never thought of myself as a data person. So hopefully that's helpful in your journey. And if you have more questions about that, I'm going to leave my email in the chat as well. If you want to know more or want a little bit more background on my personal experience with Fels.
And Kelsey is being modest. I will shout her out that she did really well in all of the data classes and was like, you know, top of everything. So good job.
Okay, I see another question here. My background is in education, specializing in, I assume that's teaching English as, sorry, I'm not sure what this acronym stands for, but
Teaching English as another language.
yes. I wonder if I can apply for public policy and if it's likely for me to win a scholarship.
So that's a great question. You know, I think that background, we do have a number of folks with education backgrounds. I would certainly say, you know, that's an area that would make a lot of sense. I think, you know, in your essay, you want to share with us your specific interest in the program, what you're hoping to do and how doing the program will help you to get there. In terms of scholarships, you know, we do, again, those are reviewed throughout the during the application process, but you know, based on the strength of your application. So it's not, I wouldn't say that, you know, if you don't have a background in policy, you're not eligible for a scholarship. You know, that's not the case. You know, folks of all backgrounds are certainly eligible. You know, the things that we're looking at are a combination of, you know, academic track record, commitment to public service. So the way that you've done previous public sector work or volunteering or internships, or kind of how you've shown that this is the type of work you're really invested in doing, fit with the program. You know, as Lauren mentioned, it's a small program, everyone's very important. So we want to make sure everyone, it's a good fit for you and also for the program. And then, you know, looking at more amorphous things, looking at results, initiative, perseverance, grit, things that we know are characteristics of really strong public sector leaders, and you know, are not as quantifiable necessarily, but are important components. So those are the areas that we're looking at both in the application process and in when merit scholarships are being awarded. So I think, you know, focusing on those areas.
Next question, how do we reach out to you if we have additional questions? Thank you, Kelsey, for providing your email address and speaking a little bit about your experience. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. Mindy will do the same. There's also a more general email that if you send your question to this place, you will get in touch with someone and we will follow up with you.
Yes, and certainly encourage folks to reach out. It's one of the fun parts of working here is getting to talk with lots of really interesting students about their backgrounds and interests. One thing, I'm not sure if there are other question areas, but Lauren mentioned the public policy and practice speaker series. So one thing that's sort of maybe a silver lining of you know, doing things virtually during the pandemic was we were able to do more of our events with people joining virtually. So we'd actually invite you, if you're interested, to join in one of the upcoming public policy and practice sessions or other events. The spring lineup should be released soon, but next Thursday, we have Johannes Abraham, who's the chief of staff for the Joe Biden's National Security Council. So it should be a really fascinating interview. And last week, or the week before, we had the two doctors that essentially created the mRNA technology that enabled the COVID vaccine. So very rarely do you talk with folks that literally saved the world, and that was pretty neat. So we'd invite you to join in for any of those as well.
I'll jump in real quick because lastly, one thing I wanted to mention, one of the biggest advantages that I found with Fels in my experience was not just learning from the professors or the speakers or you know the wealth of knowledge that the Fels network has, but also just the experience that you get as being in a small cohort. And I joined this program because I had a colleague of mine who actually came into Fels And she had experienced the cohort and had raved about it. And I think that there's a huge advantage to having that experience where you're working with other students in such a close proximity, and you get really close with your cohort, and you tend to actually learn more from your cohort than you do from anything else. Just their experiences and their wealth of knowledge, and being able to really connect with them in that way, I think was invaluable to my experience here at Penn. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to contact me. I also work here at Fels right now, so if you do contact the Fels Institute email and have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those as well. So feel free to reach out to either my personal email or that email as well.
We didn't pay her to say that. She literally just said that on her own. So.
Mindy, Kelsey, and I will stay on if you all have any more questions, but if you don't have any other questions at this time, I want to just end and say thank you so much for joining today, and we hope to hear from you or see your application.
Yeah, thanks very much.